Hello and welcome everyone to our virtual community week and to today's event, Navigating Your Career Through Difficult Times. I am Ellie Bartley and I'm a second year historian at St Hilda's College, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's event and to be joined by three extremely successful St Hilda's alumni, who I'm sure will provide us with a wealth of tips and experiences that they have acquired throughout their various careers. First, I am joined by Emma Gange. Emma is head of HR for Global Private Banking at HSBC. Working with the GPB leadership team, Emma is developing and leading their global people agenda in support of an ambitious and transformation growth plan. Prior to HSBC, Emma has held HR roles within both the financial, communications, and oil and gas industries. Next, I'd like to introduce Elaine Teo. Elaine is the founder and managing partner of Living Potential International. Elaine delivers leadership consultancy, coaching, and thought leadership to the world's most prestigious and influential organizations. Elaine is a regular on BBC and international events, sharing her cutting-edge insights on diversity and inclusion. Finally, I am joined by Sam Hussain, who was part of the college's first ever male intake. Sam started his career in management consultancy at Oliver Wyman and worked across the UK, Europe, and Middle East on strategy and growth projects. Sam founded Log My Care in 2017, which is a software startup that aims to digitize and modernize the social care industry. So I am extremely excited about this event, as I'm sure everybody watching is. So we will go into the discussion and then have a Q&A that will follow. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Emma. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Ellie. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me participate in this event. It gives me a huge amount of pleasure actually to be back in the St Hilda's College family. It's been a long while actually for me. So I actually was at St Hilda's from 94 to 98, which is a very long time ago and makes me seem very old. There must be an error in there somewhere, I'm sure. And I studied chemistry and I absolutely loved my time there. So fantastic memories, and I'm so pleased to be an alumni and keeping in touch with people. So as mentioned, studied chemistry, fantastic course, very, very theoretical. Got to the end of my 4 years and thought, what shall I do? Very good at being in the lab, wearing goggles and a white coat, but didn't feel as if that was something that I wanted to continue, and thought about other options and was really drawn to big companies and ones that offered international experience. In part, I think, because I come from the Isle of Wight, which some of you may know is a very small island at the bottom of England, and not as cosmopolitan or as international as perhaps you might like. So that was kind of the type of career I was thinking I'd like to get access to. So I actually started working with an oil company as part of the graduate scheme, and really started to get to understand the corporate world, and found that actually it was a really interesting, really changing and evolving environment to be in, with lots of opportunities. So that was for me, a really good decision in terms of being part of a graduate scheme to start with, gave me a lot of good lessons and learning. I learned my first lesson, I guess, from a career perspective when I was working for this oil company, and that was to be patient. So the oil company that I joined was called Mobil. And very shortly after I joined, one of the biggest mergers in the world, actually, at that time, or even since, I think, happened, which was that Mobil merged with Exxon to form ExxonMobil. And I actually joined the graduate scheme as a human resources professional. Obviously, my chemistry degree was not necessarily that relevant, although I always like to refer to the fact that there's chemistry between people. Maybe it's a bit cheesy, but that was my line. And so really the human resources element of a merger is extremely interesting, because it's all about how do you bring two companies together, how do you bring cultures together and make them work, and actually how do you structure a new organization from the point of view of where people are. And the patience part of it for me was the fact that the opportunities came with that merger over a period of time. They were not immediate. A little bit of dust settling had to happen. And then I was really lucky to actually get posted to a European job based in Belgium for a couple of years as a result of the merger. So for me, being quite patient actually was a very good lesson that I learned in the first part of my career. I stayed with ExxonMobil for a while, and then actually moved into a new company, a new industry in financial communications, where I stayed for a few years, realizing that actually wanting to be in London and as part of that financial center was really important to me. So it was a really good lesson for me in terms of thinking about where I wanted to be physically from a career point of view, which actually is also something to consider as well, of where you want to be in the world. That role then changed and evolved, and I ended up actually thinking about wanting to be part of an even larger organization. So I started to think about where would that be and the interest be that's sort of happening at the time in the world. And this was 2008, and it was the time of the financial crisis, which I actually hadn't necessarily been aware of until I joined HSBC, which is where I am now. So 2008, start of the financial crisis in most of the world, particularly in Europe, was a time of huge transformation in banks. And so for me, it was just another lesson and from a career perspective was be somewhere where you see actually there's a lot of transformation and change happening, because it will definitely provide you with interesting moments in your career. And I've been now in HSBC for the last 12 years in human resources positions. And as Ellie mentions, I'm now currently in a role where I'm helping our private bank, who deal with some of the world's wealthiest people, to think about where they can use their wealth in a way that potentially can leave positive impact, either to their direct family or in the world at large. So it's a very interesting role to be in, and to help the business really shape and develop the teams around that. So that's a bit about me. I guess what would be interesting for you to hear about is from my perspective, particularly as a human resources professional, some of the things that I've learned along the way in terms of building your career and getting started on a career journey. The first thing I'd say is really have a think about what your motives are. What do you really see is going to get you out of bed in the morning, engaged and energized about going to work, whatever that place might be. I'm currently sitting in my home at the moment, but still for me, it's really important that I'm doing something that I feel really passionate about. You spend a lot of time potentially doing it, so it has to be something that really drives and engages you. The second thing is think about how are you going to really stand out from the crowd, in terms of what is it that you're going to want to tell people who you are when you start to get engaged in conversations with employers and organizations. And it isn't just about your CV, particularly these days. Have a think about your LinkedIn profile, for example. Think about how you can start to use the platforms that we have on social media to your advantage. And then when you are engaged in social media, don't be afraid, reach out to people, make connections, be proactive. And be brave and reach out to connect, and just say to people you're broadening your network. It'd be really nice to start to get to understand what somebody else might be doing in their career. You never know where it might lead. Some of my pet peeves in terms of how you might think about constructing CVs, big one for me is typos. Make sure that whatever you're saying is done really well, is accurate, because it's a real reflection of what you care about and how accurate you are in terms of how you represent yourself and your achievements. And these are all your amazing achievements, so the least you can do is probably spell them correctly, is my view. The second thing I'd say is when you start thinking about those conversations that you might be having, whether it's interviews or conversations with individuals that you might think about wanting to persuade to hire you, really get a chance to research what that individual or that organization does in advance. So be really prepared. Have a look at their website, their annual reports, what they're saying on social media, any recent news articles. Have a really good understanding of what they're about, what their strategy is, what opportunities and challenges, therefore, they might be facing, and therefore what you could potentially bring to that business. It's really important that you can sort of start to build that picture for the person that might be employing you. When you're starting to think about interviews, really important that you can really concisely explain what you've been doing, how you've added value, be really clear with people, the things that you feel you're most proud of, and what would directly translate to the kind of organization that you're looking to work for. So make it quite focused and quite specific in terms of the things that you really draw out. The other thing I'd say is be really self-aware. So talk about your strengths, really talk about the things that you feel you can really bring to life in an organization, but also be prepared to be reflective around your weaknesses. Be clear about how you're perhaps developing on those things you're doing to address those weaknesses. And if you don't know what your weaknesses are, my recommendation is ask friends and family, because they'll probably tell you the things that perhaps you might want to start thinking about in a different way. They're usually quite honest with you, I find. And finally, of course, be yourself. Make sure that you're really authentic. And that brings me to my final points, which is really about what are organizations looking for these days? Because we're now working in a very changing, uncertain world. We obviously have a very tough environment around us right now, and a tough kind of year or years ahead of us. So really start to think about what is it that organizations are going to be looking for in that kind of environment. And my perspectives on this are as follows. First of all, be authentic, as I just mentioned. Act with purpose. So it's really hard to fake that. You really need to be able to be yourself in all situations. And if you end up in teams or managing people, it's really easy to spot if somebody is not being authentic, really easily. The second thing I'd say is being able to be adaptable. This environment that we're in now, we never know what's going to happen from one month to the next. So being able to be adaptable, to think about how you can respond to change is really important. Being able to bring ideas and innovation is the third thing I say is really important that people are looking for. There's a huge amount of technological change and development that's going on in our world, and thinking about how we can use some of those resources and capabilities in different ways is going to be really important as we go forward. That human skill that we can bring as we work more and more with machines and robots is going to be really important. And then finally, I'd say the last two things are the ability to collaborate. Working with other people will continue to be important, as will influencing people around you. And finally, the ability to carry on learning. So a recognition that ultimately learning is a lifelong task that we are all on, and understanding that that's something that you're going to have appetite and energy for in a role that you might be going into at whatever level, starting of your career or end of your career, is going to be really important. And to summarize, I guess, in terms of kind of as you take the steps into your career or you're thinking about changing career, is really believe that you can do things, have confidence in yourself. I like the quote from Roosevelt, which is believe you can, and you're halfway there. So it's all about confidence. So I'll stop there, Ellie, and pass back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was really insightful. So next, I would like to pass on to Elaine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Emma, for the introduction. I am contemporaries with you, so I was at Hilda's 96 to 99, so just 2 years after you. Likewise, it's a great pleasure to be back contributing to the college and also to university, especially when we look at the topic of today, which is navigating your career through difficult times. In our sort of pre-session chat, it was just really lovely to see that, this community week, which I think was a fantastic initiative, has brought together not only students, who are facing one of the bleakest job markets since, financial crisis, and myself having my original corporate background in travel, hospitality, premium services, living through many disruptions there. I think when I sat down and looked at what are some of the things that I could contribute to today's conversation, there are two things really. One of them is from our corporate work, Living Potential International, which is coaching training, and a lot of that is squarely related to how do we survive and thrive through these tough times. But since this is a college initiative, I thought it would also be nice for me to share some of my personal experiences of surviving and thriving through personal times, because one of the things that we at LPI, or Living Potential International, believe is that it's facetious to think about dividing people into categories within ourselves. We are whole people, and one of the things that we look at when we do coaching and training is that very often things sort of spill over one side or the other. If you're dealing with things like stress, or your own self-image, or for example, later on we hear from your story, Sam, being an entrepreneur, a lot of those things as well, really do come into play. So I think it's particularly important that we draw the scope of today, into sort of the whole person side of things. I started that journey at Hilda's actually because, at Hilda's I read philosophy and psychology, and my interest in people has been there since I was a little child. So it was a real blessing and a real challenge to be able to come to Hilda's and read, and understand what made people tick. And I think that still drives us and what we do with Living Potential International today. What we really enjoy doing is solving some of the world's most difficult people and culture problems. And I think, Emma, you touched on some of those key things, because one of the key aspects of the kind of job market that we're looking at now compared to, say, 20 years ago when I was in your shoes, if you're a finalist or a student right now, or yourself, Ellie, being a second-year student, is that the work market's completely changed, and it's changed forever. And if I go back and speak to my friends who are in the human resources or other sides of things, things like job automation, is something that hits everybody, even previous jobs like surgeons, and lawyers, and jobs that were previously in the realm of people, are now potentially being automated as well. So I think when we look at the area that we're interested in is really people and culture. And I think if we really look at our time today, when we look at things like Black Lives Matter, or even before that, we look at sort of, areas like dealing with women's things, these things are the things that we're particularly interested in. So we like to look at things like diversity, inclusion, cultural clashes as well. Achieving and sustaining top performance is particularly tricky, especially in a time where there's just so much stress and volatility. And I think really the key is to take off what Emma's saying, helping people to find out who you really are and who you need to be, and using our ability to support each of you to take the steps to overcome these challenges and to actually get there. And in terms of expertise, I want you to walk away from today's session understanding that we are all already in possession of far more wisdom about ourselves and what works well and what doesn't work well for us. And I think in times of stress, it's particularly important to ground ourselves back in that understanding, because it's the easiest thing in the world to look around yourself and to see how other people may be coping with their challenges, and imposter syndrome starts cropping in, or you start feeling stressed, or you start thinking that you're just not coping as well as everybody else, and yet we all still feel to a certain extent that we have to put a face on. Back to the point about authenticity, I think that is a particularly difficult position to deal with during stressful times. And when I look back at my own experience and the sort of nuggets that I want to share with you today, some of my greatest learning experiences have come during some of my very toughest times. And I think this is something that I'd like us to spend a little bit of time perhaps in the Q&As talking about, because when I look back at my last 20 plus years, of doing what I've been doing, and also being a mother of 3 children ages between 9 to 14 as well, there's sometimes a little bit of an assumption that challenges are to be braved or faced or maybe avoided, or they have to be tough. I'm here today to share with you that challenges are also to be welcomed. And if we can learn how to manage our conscious experience, how do we self-care? How do we be resilient? How do we just make sure that we know how to manage our own internal experiences within those stressful and challenging experiences? You will find, as I have found, that some of the greatest learnings, about life, some of the greatest things that actually help you to thrive and to break from where you were before to get to the next level lie in precisely those what we call crucible experiences. So I think looking at all these multiple professional and personal challenges that I've been through, life, that have brought me to my knees, time and time again, the beautiful thing about going through challenging times is that you learn some things that you can't learn otherwise. And I've thought long and hard about suffering, because that's a fundamental human condition. And I've learned several things that when you learn how to go through suffering, you can get to emerging to a better and a stronger and a clearer and happier place each time. And so some of these lessons that I want to share with you today come from my corporate experience, when after my path at St. Hilda's, I now work in corporate marketing in fairly large companies and product development in Singapore Airlines and American Express back in Singapore for 6 years. Then I moved as a trailing spouse, and I gave absolutely everything up, and I started all over again, starting LPI from scratch in Zurich in Switzerland. And that was where I also simultaneously started balancing work and life, having the first of our 3 children as well. Certain themes also that when I thought about the navigating, career through challenging times, I also wanted to make a reference to myself being Chinese, Singaporean, and also being a woman, because I think it's really important that we look at some of the systemic factors that can be challenging for each of us as we make our way through the world. And certain elements like racism and misogyny, have marked my career and also my personal practice here and there. And I think it's particularly important that we look carefully at these elements as they crop out in our lives and think about what opportunities are in there for us to take these aspects and actually to transform them into something that's strong for ourselves. So I think the key thing is that when we look at these issues, and 2 decades on, when I dealt with these issues, we're still facing many of these overt and hidden factors. And I think that's one of the first things that I want to share with you today, that when we look at how we navigate our careers through challenging times, there are 2 main aspects that we're looking at. One of them is working with other people. And with working with other people, this could be anybody. This could be obviously people working within our teams, working within organizations. It could be also working within our family, working within our own cultures. There are lots of other things. So there's one big bucket that some of these factors, when we look at the challenging times, those sources could be coming from the other people that we're working with. And when we localize it that way, that gives us certain ways in where we actually think about diagnosing where these challenges may come from so that we can address each of them. Similarly, simultaneously, there are also issues to self. So the self to other, is always a present dynamic. That when we sit down, we think about how do we actually take control of our careers. It's important that we make sure that we look and see what opportunities exist for us to change others and what opportunities exist for us to change ourselves. So just to give you a couple of clear-cut examples, when I think back on the difficult work environments in which I was working in, there were experiences in my life where I realized only later on, especially as a young graduate, as many of the students listening in today, you're thinking about that, you may take time to realize that it might not actually be yourself. It might be the microcosm or the specific environment or that culture around you that may not be the right fit for you. Now, this was a personal experience of mine, and it took me several years for me to realize that there is a lot to be said for actually finding yourself in an environment that actually is a better and a truer match for what you really feel that you have the ability to be. And I think this is something that I wanted to land with today's audience as well, because from our perspective, looking at people who have been in business for 20, 30, 40 years, sometimes that can hit you at various points in your career as well, when you may be in a position and you might find that there is a growing discrepancy between who you feel you are best being in a particular environment. So take this as an opportunity for you to always challenge yourself and to always invite yourself to keep an ongoing dialogue between the person that you're evolving to be and those opportunities which you feel you're ready to go for next. And sometimes those opportunities could lie outside of your current environment. So that's one of the things with regard to actually looking at your external environment, and that opportunity is always available for you. I think the other aspect, though, that I want to talk about is also what to do with yourself. Now, self-work involves lots of different aspects of it. And I think if we look at certain aspects, like when I think about my meditation teacher training, for example, that was probably where I found the core of my understanding certain aspects of how to work with the nature of the self. So when we say, what does it actually mean for us to understand ourselves? Now, we are then really looking at our strengths, but we're also looking at how we manage with our stress. And we're also learning about how we actually understand that this is a bit of a journey. And when we think about some of the key things that I wanted to share with you today, one of the biggest learnings for me came only about a couple of years ago, when I realized that whatever we experience within ourselves is by nature transient and short-lived. What that meant for me when I realized this was when I looked back at my 20 plus years of success as well as of challenging times, it would have been a much easier ride on myself during those 20 plus years if I realized that I didn't have to take things so hard upon myself. And when I look at some of the issues that I'm helping support people who are going through career crisis or work-life balance issues, or they're in a position of burnout, one very common factor that we find is that people tend to take things really hard on themselves. And one of the key things that I want to share with you as we're facing these challenging times is certain aspects of self-care, really being kind and understanding and patient and gentle with yourself, finding ways to make sure that you resort to taking that self-care, not allowing yourself to feel, in a sense, guilty or that you are somehow being weak or vulnerable, especially for men as well as for women, is particularly important during these times. Why is that? Because when you are able during these stressful times to find your way back to strengthening that space that you hold for yourself, that becomes your protection for you to be able to deal with all the multiple stresses and volatilities that come your way. The challenge with not knowing how to take care of yourselves, in this way, is also that you will find yourself very easily destabilized by a situation that we're facing right now that will continue to be full of unexpected curveballs that will be coming your way. You also find yourself vulnerable to lots of different opinions and different ideas that could be offered to you, as I found myself as well when I was going through my various question mark and just pivotal points in my life when I was going to people who were giving me ideas, for example. It can be very confusing to find out what's really right for you and to tune in into yourself. That's really difficult to do when you're in a position of stress and you're feeling, in a sense, obliged to listen to other people and all of that. Many people, many of our clients, go through years sometimes, being, in a sense, lost in this way, listening to the beat of somebody else's drum or what they think they ought to do. And this is something that we see whether you start, straight out of university, but it's also something that goes all the way through to some very senior people as well. So taking this time to invest in strengthening that connection with yourself, tuning out the noise and tuning more into what you feel you need to have in your life and what you do not need to have in your life. What you need to say no to is equally important compared to what you want to say yes to. So to round up my little session here, there are 5 steps that I wanted to share with you just in terms of what you can do taking this step forward. The first thing is to set your intention, get super clear as much as you can of what you truly want and desire. Visualize it as clearly as you can, as a present, not as something that you're striving for or something that you're working towards, but when you visualize that as your future, that's a very powerful place to start. Number 2, take actions to materialize on this intention. Thomas Guthrie said the greatest things on earth have been done little by little. So take heart, be patient, and make sure that you're working steadily towards that goal, and it all adds up. Thirdly, be gritty about it. Angela Duckworth wrote a wonderful book about grit. In a sense, it's about wash, rinse, repeat, just persevering with the setting of the intention and following up with these consistent actions. Step 4, self-care liberally all along the way. My personal mantra is to remind myself to be kind, warm, patient, understanding, and gentle on yourself. And the beautiful thing is that when you start to become better at that with yourself, you start to be able to do that to other people as well. And that's fantastic for interpersonal relationship building. Finally, celebrate. Celebrate your successes, big and small. It's more important than ever when there's so much bad news in the world and all around us to make sure that you keep yourself strong and healthy. So make sure that you feed yourself well on positive messages on yourself as well. So that's all I had to share for today, and I'm looking forward to the Q&As. I'm going to hand back to you now, Ellie.
Amazing, thank you. Really useful tips there, Elaine, thank you. So now I'd like to pass on to Sam.
Hi, Ellie. Thanks for having me. So really, I have quite a different experience, I think, of life since university to our other 2 panelists, and really I wanted to kind of run through how I ended up, getting into my startup and running it, and that real journey. And I think for some people listening, they might think, yeah, that sounds really great and exciting, and other people will think, actually, that sounds stressful and terrifying, and it's not for me. And there are completely 2 sides of the coin, and definitely no right answer. So I guess just stepping back to my time at Oxford. So yeah, the other 2 panelists had to navigate the last financial crisis. I actually started at St Hilda's in 2008, so just as the financial crisis had hit, which was actually very fortunate because I was at Oxford waiting for the storm to settle. Thankfully, it had settled by the time I left in 2012. So was able to come out with a job. But really, while I'd been at St Hilda's, I'd made, I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. I had known in the back of my mind that at some point I wanted to be running my own business, but I saw that being some way into the future, and I'd no real idea what it was, and I had no real idea about the business world either. And I'd got into engineering science because of how my brain worked. I couldn't stop from wanting to solve problems and try and make things more efficient and optimize systems, and that was just how my brain works, and it suited engineering. I used the time at St Hilda's, those 4 years, to try and test out actually where I thought my career was going to go, and it was from a point of really not knowing and testing things and seeing, did I like that, yes or no. Most of the time, it was often a no, which was useful to learn, right? You test things, if it doesn't work, then try something else. One of the first internship I did while I was at Oxford was for a big engineering company, and I found that the pace of that company too slow. I thought I never got to see, we were designing things, but these were projects that might actually turn into a physical product in 10 or 20 years. And I wanted to see, I knew then I wanted to see the immediate impact of what I was doing. So I kind of wrote off most of engineering and actually wrote off really big companies as well, which was pretty useful. I then just happened to chance and apply for an internship at the online supermarket Ocado. So this was in 2010, so 10 years ago. It was about a 10-year-old company at the time, about 100 people in the head office, and it felt like a startup suddenly. It was 100 people, which is already a pretty large startup, and they're already nationwide, delivering food across the country. But things were breaking, the teams were evolving, they were growing the teams very quickly. It felt kind of exciting, but also slightly panicked. And that was really my first, you'd call that nowadays a scale-up company, but at the time I thought, oh, this is my first like insight into a small company, and I kind of like it, and it's really exciting. I guess it didn't leave me with, yes, I want a career in online retailing. And I still went back to the careers fairs and was testing out other ideas. And at one of them, I started speaking to people about management consulting, and that it sounded like it was everything I was looking for, which was actually buying myself more time to make a proper decision. It was sold to me at the time, and accurately, to be fair, of you're going to be solving businesses' most complicated, most difficult strategy projects that they can't solve themselves, or they don't have the capacity to solve themselves. So you're always going to be working on short, really interesting, really strategic projects, and you'll learn a lot of skills and you'll travel the world. So I joined a firm called Oliver Wyman, which to be fair, a lot of people out of Oxford do. It was quite an Oxbridge centric graduate intake, and the whole firm was probably at least half Oxford and Cambridge, which was on one hand familiar. It was very easy to get on with people, and it was very cool having such a bright cohort of people around you to teach you and to inspire you. But on the other hand, it wasn't a very diverse place, and that was, so in building my own company later, that was something I didn't want to emulate, was that sort of single type of character. Like I've learned since then that actually diverse teams tend to do better. But that time at Oliver Wyman, so I was there for 3.5 years in total, arguably a bit too long for what I was intending, because I was intending to be there to just pick up business skills really, and learn about how business works. And that sounds really vague, but that such was my understanding of how kind of the world worked at that time. During the interview process, one of the questions was, please explain what happened and why the financial crisis occurred. And so I had to have that up my sleeve. I had to understand how the various mechanisms of the financial system work just to get in through the front door. And then we ended up working with a lot of the companies that had survived the crisis, but many of them had been sort of partly involved in it. So I was working for typically quite large companies, most of whom, I managed to keep myself mostly on kind of growth and investment projects. So those were the ones that I found most exciting. And I think this was a point to make about my career then at that point, was I was actually being very selfish in what I was looking for. And I think it's not too wrong to admit that I was being selfish, in that I was looking to just pick up skills and work on exciting projects. And I was almost thinking about my own portfolio. I was trying to build my own CV and skill set. I wasn't really trying to build my career as a management consultant. I knew very early on I was never going to, stay there long enough to go up and become a partner. And the decisions I was taking and the angles I was trying to steer myself in were really for my own benefit, and not trying to benefit the firm, which is, I think, a lot of people would think, actually, this is a great job. It's got a lot of potential to stay here and grow. But I knew it was so temporary that I actually kind of, effectively used it to teach me what I needed it to teach me. And some of those most useful projects, particularly one of them, which was in the Middle East, I was working in a team for a big sovereign wealth fund, and they wanted to spend a lot of money or invest a lot of money in new projects to set up new technology businesses. So this was probably my first experience of, how do we set up something from scratch? Like, how do we write a business plan? How do we financially model what this could look like if it works, and then compare these to each other and see which of these many projects we actually should be running with. And those are probably the most critical skills that I walked away with and have used them, endlessly in the startup world. And I think if I had not spent that time in consulting, I would, not have been able to get this far with my own startup. So I did, I guess, after a few years in consulting, I had really a bit of a, at the time it was jokes about, it was, quarter life crisis started becoming a phrase that was talked about, but I really felt it because I was working for this firm. I was, it wasn't something that I had any ownership in, but I was working, often sort of through the nights. I was traveling across the world, not always, not getting to see my friends as much as I wanted, or family. And I think the quarter life crisis is just a point where you feel suddenly a bit unfulfilled by what you're currently doing. And, that accelerated me into thinking, what is it that I want to do next? Like, I've got this longer term picture of where I want to be, but I think I'm through the first stepping stone now. And what I kind of, what I did at the time was I joined a couple of friends with a first startup, but this was just part-time. It was an online dry cleaning delivery company. And this was before, there have been a few other successful startups in that area, like ZipJet, for example. Sadly, they all started at about the same time as us, which was bad timing. But that experience, or me wanting to do that, was really trying to scratch an itch, but an itch to run my own business and do my own thing. But what it taught me at that experience was really, you won't manage this unless you put your whole energy into it. A side project is never going to really take off, and actually it's so difficult to start a business that unless it's got your full attention, it's going to fail. And that first startup of ours did fail. Like, we built a really nice website. We had initial customers. We did about £5,000 worth of orders in the first few months. So nowadays you'd say, actually, that's proven the concept, and you should go out and raise investments and try and grow this thing. We didn't, because we weren't fully in it. None of us were fully committed. And so one day one of our partners pulled out of the deal, and suddenly we couldn't fulfill orders, and we realized actually we couldn't keep this going on the side. After that, I really had nothing left to kind of stay in consulting for, and that itch was still there. I wanted to get into, I'd worked with big businesses on short-term projects. I wanted to get into slightly smaller businesses and be more operationally involved. And I thought at the time a good way to do that was actually going to be to join a private equity fund. So these funds, they invest themselves and buy lots of small or medium-sized companies, and then they try and grow them and ultimately sell them. But I thought actually being part of that growth journey would be really helpful for myself as well. It turned out that actually it wasn't what my heart was in, and that showed, and it showed to everyone involved. And they were all there for the career and the progression, and this was everything they wanted. And for me, this was again another stepping stone. So I didn't stay there long, but it did teach me a few things more about the investment world. What do investors find attractive in companies? How other companies were pitching to us of, look how attractive we are. I was able to see that, and that was actually something that's, again, it's helped me, ultimately in my own startup. I guess a bit more about how I kind of got into my own thing. I ended up after that working in Singapore for a software house out there. And that was me really wanting to get into now a very small company. I actually was going to have some ownership in that business, possibly take over from the CEO at a later date. And they had, various software products, but one of them was for nursing homes out in Singapore. And one of my first experiences was to come back to the UK and try and lead a market entry of that software into the UK. And this was knowing not very much about software, although the tech scene had really started to emerge, and it had been something I read around and was interested in, but didn't know too much about tech. And then the social care industry, which I really knew nothing about. So I had about a year with that company, just trying to force this very Singapore-based software into the UK market, which sadly, to the best of our intentions, it wasn't working. It needed a fresh approach to the product itself. And when I've fed this back and it didn't get, it wasn't going to get acted on, I decided actually this is the time I need to break away and have a fresh go at this, because the social care market here was so analog, and I saw that working for this other company, there was a huge opportunity here to change an industry, but I could see that product wasn't going to do it, and I thought, actually I can do this. I've learned just about enough now that I feel now's my time, and this is the sector I want to help change. So I kind of poured my savings into this company to begin with on day one with just me, and I set about getting a first product built. I knew what it had to do, and it was all around digitizing the care record, or having a cloud-based care record. I basically put all my savings into that, and started frantically trying to build a team around me, and also get this product ready, and then get it into first customers. And that first year was probably the most stressful, because in the course of the first year and a bit, we I had the team, managed to grow the team to 3 of us, and I'll come back to that in a second, because there's another St. Hilda's connection there. But ultimately we managed to get it into the first 5 customers, which was super hard and stressful and difficult, because no one wants to take a risk when you're an unproven little company and you're saying we can do things better, but you've got no track record, no proof that it's secure, no proof that it's not going to fall over. And then probably the toughest and most stressful thing after that was actually raising angel investment for the first time, because a bit like finding your first customer, the process of finding angel investment or any investment is a huge heartbreaking process of many rejections before you get some yeses. And the thing is, once you do start to get some yeses, it then starts to snowball. But getting that first one, or those first few, is the hardest thing, and makes you question all the time, like, why have I done this? This isn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be fun and easy and exciting, and actually it's brutally hard at times. But if things do get better and they do get easier, and it does feel like a snowball, I think, starting your own business, because the more customers you have, the more other people look at you and say, oh, actually they are, that is a trustworthy product, or I can see it's got reviews, whatever it is, or as you're building an investment round, oh, I've seen, you've got several £100,000 committed already. by people who know what they're talking about. So, you know, they'll have done their due diligence, and now I'll just follow them. It always becomes easier once the ball is rolling. But I have to say, actually, I've, you know, been incredibly lucky in knowing, well, in building my team. I actually got Adam Hurst involved, and Adam, he was in my engineering science cohort with me at St Hilda's, and actually we were next door to each other in first year on garden building. And he didn't join me from day one, but he had become a full stack engineer after Oxford, and I asked him a favor, which was to, you know, while we were building this first product, to have a look at the code for me and, you know, do a bit of a code review. And he then started getting interested, and you know, it took me about 6 months, but I managed to get him to join as the head of the engineering side. So, you know, maybe look at the people around you in your St Hilda's cohort, and some of those could end up being a future business partner of yours. And it's never too, you know, I wasn't expecting it at the time, but it's never too early to maybe think about that. So I guess, yeah, we've grown our team now to about 8 people. We now have our own office in London. I mean, you know, we raised another round of investment just before COVID hit, which was fortunate. And yeah, I'd say just kind of a few points that I would like to just come back to. And actually, Emma, you said something very similar, which was really think about, you know, you might not know straight away, but try and find that thing that you're interested in that motivates you, because you're going to do much better at doing something you enjoy and be much more successful, whatever that is, than in doing something where your heart's not there. So it took me a long time to find it, but when I did, it, you know, it completely changes your life and your outlook and happiness levels, which, you know, I feel really lucky to have found. I guess the other thing is that, you know, connections in life are super important, and you never know where you're going to make them, but you have to, I would say, start early. Someone said that, in fact, my dad said to me when I was at Oxford, start networking now. And at the time, networking felt like a dirty word. But, you know, Adam now, who works with me, you know, met him at Oxford. You know, the networking that I had to do to get angel investors, like that was evenings and nights at events and talking to people who introduced me to other people. And it's not a dirty word. It's sadly an essential in getting on. And people who are really good at it and started early are gonna, again, have an easier time of it in life, I think. The other thing I'm glad I did was to kind of test different things when I was young, and accept that some things didn't, you know, I didn't enjoy them, or they didn't work out, or I was no good at them, and that was fine. You know, it's actually it's a real startup methodology to test things and test and learn and iterate, and you can actually apply that to your own life as well, which I found really helpful. And I think the last thing I would say is I felt this out, you know, not too consciously, but I think the time is coming that if I was at university now, you'd need to be a lot more conscious, I think, about where the world is going. And automation was mentioned earlier, and I would think really hard about any career you go into, and whether that could be automated, whether that job is still going to be around in 20 years. And you know, that's sadly going to have to factor into, I think, what careers people choose now. So I think that's all from me, Ellie, but back over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. That was really interesting. So I'd just like to say thank you again to Emma, Elaine and Sam. I think this is very new to us all, having a panel discussion without an audience and just talking to each other, but it's worked great. And also it's obviously a very pertinent time to be talking about the world of work and as it adapts and changes, like you said, Sam. So yeah, that was really useful and very interesting. So I think we're going to go into the Q&A now. We have questions already flying through. So we're going to start with the first question addressed to everybody. So the first one is, how critical do you think industry-specific experience is in getting a role in companies? And do you think that there is a big difference between small and large companies on this? So, Emma, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think things have changed over time, and I think it also varies by country, so depending on where you are. But actually, I think that there's now a lot more kind of flexibility in terms of the view of skills and transferability of skills. And I think, as we've just heard from Sam, in terms of the various elements of how his career is built over time, I mean, that is becoming much more of a norm. It's much more unusual now for people to have sort of stayed within one particular industry for their entire career. So I think actually don't be frightened to think about your career in a sort of building block sense, but still be really clear about what your sort of ultimate goal is, and therefore it's kind of purposeful. Otherwise it can look a little bit, and feel, to be honest, a little bit scattergun. And it will be then harder to try and piece that together if you're thinking about what is it you're trying to achieve, or for an organization to look at your background and understand decisions that you've taken along the way.
I'll say that various industries, they've got different degrees of industry specificity as well. So for example, STEM-based industries, you would pretty much have to have a pretty strong technical background, or say many of my friends who are in banking, or the standard professions, for example, accountancy and medicine, those tend to require quite a lot of upfront investment. So I think to a certain extent, in certain industries, that's still quite fixed. There are many, many other industries though, and there are also many emerging new forms of business. For example, people are selling millions of pounds worth of stuff on platforms that we didn't think existed 10 years ago, like Instagram or Pinterest, or these various ways of making money. My kids love watching YouTube stars, doing Minecraft videos, and I think the most popular one makes about $20 million a year, in terms of subscription. So I think the world of work is shifting very, very rapidly, and so I think to that certain extent, the degree to which one needs the industry-specific experience is also changing very rapidly. So I think the very key thing here is to keep that balance again, and to make sure that you keep a really clear grip on what suits you and what doesn't suit you, because that can be very difficult pressure to withhold. I remember when I was at Oxford, and the milk rounds were all the investment banks and all the management consultancy, and it can be very, very tempting because they offer, like you were mentioning, Sam, the promise of a great life and also fantastic training. But at the same time, actually going into that sort of level of work may or may not suit you as a person. So it's particularly important that you make sure that you keep room inside yourself to listen out as to whether that's the right path or the wrong path for you. I think the question about small versus big, definitely. I think there are pros and cons to both, and I think it really depends on kind of what you're out after. The benefit of small companies, for example, hearing from your experience, Sam, is that, and also chiming on my own experience, but in my own business as well, is that you kind of get an incredible spread, because you really are the beginning and the end. You do a bit of everything, and it's fantastic experience. And when you do that, again, going back to learning through your challenges, you realize that you're capable of learning far more than you realized. And that in itself can sometimes be very difficult as an experience to gain when you're working for a very large firm. However, I usually encourage my starter graduate clients as well that a stint at a large corporation is also incredibly helpful. Emma, for example, you referenced your time working at HSBC and all these earlier, companies that you're working with as well. For myself, when I look back at starting my career for two very large companies, Singapore Airlines, which is about 25,000 employees, American Express, which was not much less, I learned so much about what a really large organization is, very powerful, very influential, how things work inside there. So I would encourage, everyone really to look agnostically, and objectively at the pros and cons, of small versus big, and also starting up your own business, potentially as a side hustle, as well, just to get a sense of what it's like building that up, and then allow yourself that time, and stay with it. Don't throw in the towel too early, or don't come to premature conclusions. Grit, for example, Angela Duckworth talks about 1 or 2 years worth of sticking at something before you're really able to kind of get that thing. So don't just stick out 3 months and say, oh, working for a big company is not right for me, and then you might actually have ended up not really getting the right experience there.
Yeah, I think I would not add too much more to that, to be honest. I mean, I think, like Emma said, we're really moving into an age of people having a portfolio career So doing lots of different things, potentially in different industries. And I would echo the thought as well of that's all great, but your CV will always tell a story, and you should also try and be on a path to something. So I would be surprised if I saw a CV that was completely different industries and completely different types of role. I think that's the main thing, actually, because there should always be a story. There should always be a, why am I doing this? Why am I moving? I spent my time here, but it was to get to there. I think in the UK, we're quite lucky in that generally people are not too worried about past experience and are more interested in capabilities. And I know certainly I am as an employer. I've looked at completely random CVs for a role but actually if someone can do the job and they can prove that from a completely different set of experiences than you might have otherwise written down or planned for, then actually they can be just as successful as or more so.
Great, thank you. So next we have a question from Anna, and she would like to hear from Elaine and Emma about how they have balanced their personal and professional goals and ambitions.
With great difficulty, Anna. With great difficulty. And I think what's very important is that you give yourself time. I mean, some of the things and some of the experiences that I learned took well over sort of 10 to 20 years to go through. And I think what's very important is that you, if possible, that you get really clear with yourself about what are the must-haves in your life. So for myself, having children was always something that I knew I wanted to do. I was also relatively lucky in that I've always been enduringly interested in what made people tick. So I was fortunate, to have found that fairly early on. And so I kind of set it up for myself that I was going to devote myself to raising the children for the time, the first sort of 10, 12 years of their life, and just really set that foundation clear. And I made a conscious sacrifice to put my career, on sort of a back burner to a certain extent while I fulfilled that role. And that's exactly how it's worked out. It's not without its challenges, and it's not that it's easy. And, definitely there's a lot of communication, there are a lot of lessons learned along that way. But overall, I'm content with that decision that I made. And therefore, the investment in yourself, knowing what it is that you really are after, helps enormously, because what I was able to do was, over the last 15 years that I've run LPI, I've been able to never be out of work. So I've always kept it bubbling away. And my image is sort of like cooking a stew, at the back burner. It's always just constantly cooking. And I was just very conscious of making sure that I made that happen so that I never really fell out of the market. Also, because it was a subject I was interested in, it was very easy for me to keep myself motivated and on the ball in terms of my continual professional training. I invested in my own, ongoing professional development, going for training courses every year, just making sure that the tools in my toolbox were sharp, and I was just really using these tools with my friends, my family, and also with my own clients as well, to make sure that I always stayed relevant. So I think that really has helped me in the last 2 years, that I've been able to really take my work up a significant notch. I found that actually worked out beautifully, because now I was able to kind of just segue straight into picking up work full time, without really missing too much of a beat. But at the same time, also having lived through those struggles means that I can very authentically connect with many of my clients who are, like your question indicates, struggling with the same things as well. And I think if I had a different life experience, perhaps I wouldn't have been able to connect in such an authentic way, and my clients may not necessarily have been able to relate, to what I had to share, because I might just have been someone who had it very easy, with that challenge, and then wasn't able necessarily to understand how difficult it could be for them. Emma?
Yeah, I think it's a question that everyone faces. I think from a female perspective, there are certain perspectives that you can bring, but I think everyone, male or female or gender non-binary, needs to think about how do they want to balance the things that are important in their lives. I had someone ask me a question still 3 years ago, actually, so quite recently, and said, imagine yourself at your retirement party. What do you want people to have said about you or be saying about you at that party? So I was imagining myself, I was actually in Palm Springs for the retirement party because I love the sun. So I thought that's where I'll be. And surrounded actually mainly by friends and family and some work colleagues, and talking about actually, I guess, the amount of fun that I'd had, and hopefully I'd been able to kind of bring to people's lives, as well as hopefully making a difference. So I kind of, if you start to think about it in those terms, it can start to bring to life what are the things that are still going to be meaningful and important for you as you go through your entire life in career and in personal life. So that for me, I think it was an important sort of way to crystallize that actually my friends and family and relationships are very important to me, and therefore not wanting to necessarily compromise on that. So I've worked in different locations in my career. I'm married to a woman, and she and I we both have careers. She runs a business. So we've been trying to kind of work out how can we both get what we want from our careers in different locations. I lived in Belgium by myself, but more recently we both lived in Brazil together for 3 years, which was amazing, in a role that I was doing with HSBC. And so it's about sort of trying to work through the give and take of relationships that we work with these days. So they're very much the sort of non-traditional as we sort of get more into kind of different ways of working. The other practical thing I do in keeping balance is I do loads of yoga. I'm a massive advocate of yoga, which I discovered about 12 years ago. And I'm actually sitting in a half lotus right now, just to kind of keep that tradition alive. Just for me, it's a really amazing way of keeping my head calm, my body strong, and clearing my mind at the end of the day. It really works for me.
Yeah.
Great. I actually wish I could do yoga. I always seem to topple over. Anyway, the next question. A viewer would like to hear from Sam about his experience working in the Middle East, and did this require fluency in Arabic?
No, and it's a good thing it didn't, because I can count to 10 and order hummus, but that's about it. No, working in the Middle East was all in English. Kind of my name and surname kind of fit, but that was about it. Business there is all done in English, and they're quite used to that, really.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Will Feasy to everybody. Is working from home going to become the norm in the coming years, or will office work always have a place?
I think it really depends on, again, the nature of work in the industry. I think what we're seeing with coronavirus has been a lot of innovation and a lot of very creative solutions for people to find ways to continue to provide value back to the industry. However, of course, there are certain things like, for example, I've got quite a lot of hospitality clients, and hospitality is obviously a bricks and mortar business, and that's particularly challenging, in a sort of situation like that. However, other industries, like for example, for myself, a lot of consultancies, a lot of financial services, can segue to, to a more effortless online presence. Of course, there are limitations as well. I think that's going to be an overall question that's embedded within a wider configuration of work plus life, because I think also I do a lot with clients who are burnout, and I think part of that has also because you're just yoking yourself to that super fast pace of business, and sometimes you're just chasing shareholder value or profit margins or sales targets without really taking a breath back to stop and think about whether that's really the right thing to do. And so I think just generally within our own practice at LPI, the whole question of saying no and knowing what it is that you really need, and sort of really being very clear on that, and then being able to make the choices out from that. I think what COVID-19 has allowed companies to also start to do is to also to take that conversation on board at an organizational level and at a team level as well. And so I think there are many possible configurations coming out of this. Some I've observed, just want to get straight back to the old norm and just, hit the ground running and just kind of go on again. But I think a lot of people who have taken the last few months of massive forced reconfiguration and actually say, what, I quite like, spending more time with family, or I quite like having more time to myself, or I quite like not having to be rushing to meetings all the time, and using this period before we get back to full steam ahead again to reconsider how much of that is office-based, how much of that is home-based, how much of that is that you don't actually want to travel, as a consultant, every week anymore, to a far-flung office location with your clients, and maybe that's just not a way of life that you are content to do with anymore. So I think all of those things are happening at the moment, from my perspective.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm I'm a big fan of the office. In fact, I'm in ours at the moment. But I do, we have as a company managed to carry on pretty effectively. If you're just looking at an efficiency point of view, we've hit milestones, we've written X lines of code, like it's all carried on happening while people have been from home, and there's not really a measurable productivity hit, but I think that the companies are going to start changing the way they think about what needs to happen in the office. Like offices were originally built to kind of just make sure that employees are there and do a set number of hours of work. Companies are moving in a different direction, and I think should, which is, it's about what people can produce and what environments we need to put them in or help them with to get the most out of them and to keep them happy. So for us as a young growing business, the productivity's been fine, but what we've not been able to really build, is any feeling of culture or team or and what we miss out on are the kind of brainstorms around a whiteboard, and you can't reproduce those very well yet digitally. And I don't know if you ever will be able to get to the same level. So I think there's always going to be an aspect of needing to be in an office, but I think that what offices are doing and what they're designed for is going to change, and not just going to be a sea of desks. They're probably going to be more aimed at helping foster creativity for the time you're in. And I think people are going to appreciate a bit more flexibility, because you might come into the office for your creative time and for your team building, but then you might be twice as efficient in a quiet environment at home. So things are definitely changing, and it's made COVID has made people definitely think more critically about just doing what we've always done. For us, I think that the office is always going to be kind of the hub and the heart of the company, but I can see us, if we grew to too many people for this office, which I think hopefully will happen, then we would probably not think how we used to, which is, okay, let's get an even bigger office and house everyone. We'd probably be thinking then of encouraging more and more flexi working, and people come in and out, might work in shifts or teams or however it would work. But I think the concept of one huge office for a whole company anymore is going to die.
I would just add to that. So HSBC has 230,000 people. So this is a fantastic opportunity in some ways to kind of use this really challenging world situation to start thinking about how can we think about work in a really different way and harness some of these lessons, and also demonstrated productivity, as you say, Sam, that things can continue, but balancing that with the needs of customers and clients, where relationships and relationship building, particularly in banking, is extremely useful. And in some cases that will be very hard to replicate virtually. And the other thing that I'm particularly interested in as well is learning, and how can we do the sort of unplanned learning. So you can structure huge amounts of learning through all of the platforms that we have. But I know from when I was first starting work and doing things like internships or first starting in roles, I did a lot of just listening in to what people were doing and saying and how they were managing situations and having a challenging phone conversation or having a difficult conversation with somebody. So it's how do we start to think about creative ways that we can replicate that? And I think this environment is driving some of that work and some of those decisions to be taken now, where perhaps some organizations, there may have been a bit more reticence in terms of, well, it kind of works as it is all right at the moment, so let's not kind of push it too far. So this for me is a fantastic opportunity for us to really think how we as humans can be productive. So we'll see. I'm very excited to be sort of part of this part of time.
Great, thank you. So we have another question. What advice would you give to young graduates who are currently on furlough and to those who have unfortunately lost their jobs due to COVID? Sam, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, absolutely. I would really think very hard about reskilling or picking up new skills. And I know people who've been in that position, and have done things like teach themselves to code or teach themselves a new language or enrolled themselves in a a marketing course. There's a lot of really great free material out there, or don't be afraid of paying for the better stuff as well. I think, the world has changed very quickly suddenly, and it's a bit Darwinian, but if you're able to adapt, then you'll be on the better side of things as we emerge from the crisis. So I would really think about building your own skills.
I would just add to say, as I mentioned at the beginning, start to think about your network. So this is the time, I think, to not be, afraid to reach out to people, give people a sense of what's happening with you, what you're interested in looking to do next. Even if it is, again, just exploring opportunities, you never know where these kinds of conversations will lead. And to have the confidence to do that. So really, feel that most people who are contacted and asked for support, to offer support or help, will always give it. So really, feel that you should be being as proactive as possible, and make sure that your profile, your LinkedIn information and other platforms you might use is really up to date and can really sell your skills and what you've been doing up till now.
I would add to that by saying that it's a great time for self-examination and getting to know, what it is that you want to do. So to add on to the upskilling, there are 4 aspects with regard to understanding yourself, which I like to share, which is our LPI model of really sort of building your self-awareness, and that's your passions, your strengths, your values, and that all drives towards purpose. So passions are things that you're interested in. Strengths are things that you're good at. Values are things that you care about, and that's people as well as causes. And purpose is really taking all those 3 components and driving it towards benefiting other people. So if you use this time and just use these 4 simple elements to just do the self-examination, you can actually direct your attention, towards benefiting other people in various specific forms and activities. So it could be, for example, that you can use this time to really take up some work experience, or just do some community engagement, or just read up, or find ways to engage with specific causes or specific areas of interest that you've always wanted to know before you take the further step into thinking whether you wish to invest in that. Because I think ultimately the challenge is also spreading yourself too thin. It can get very easy that you just end up doing a little bit of everything. A certain amount of focus and investment and sticking to something is important. So being discerning with making sure that you spread your attention to specific things, I think is particularly important as well. So that, I think, is a critical aspect of making sure that you use this time to very discretionarily just devote yourself to those things that are important as well.
Thank you. So do you see that there's a strong relationship between confidence in the workplace and age? And how would you advise young people trying to find or gain their confidence? So this is for everyone.
This is a topic I took to 2 senior female friends of mine who were a bit dismissive about the fact that young women, starting out, their position then was, young women ought to be more confident in the workplace. And I'm not saying that it's only young women in the workplace who may necessarily have the confidence. It's just a story. And I pointed out to these 2 very successful ladies who were all one was probably in her late 40s and similar. I said, look, it's taken you the better of 2 decades, to get to this position of very natural self-confidence for yourself. And it's important that we remember what it was like when we were entering the workplace. And it was a very different world from us then. I think confidence also comes to a certain extent from knowing yourself. And you can't take away from the fact that if you've lived a certain amount of life, I'm in my early 40s at the moment, you just really just acquire a certain amount of that self-knowledge that comes across as confidence, because you've experienced the hard way what works for you, what doesn't work for you, both personally and professionally. And that clarity, is a very deep sense of that self-confidence. So I think a very important part also for a young person is just to be patient with yourself and realize that that comes with a certain amount of living. I think the other aspect also is that some of the most confident people I know are young people, because they don't have the burden of history. They don't have the burden of conditioning. There's so much openness and willingness to experiment, and the world's a very different place nowadays. So actually, I wouldn't so clear-cut say that, yes, is definitely a yes, or there is definitely a no. Ultimately, I think the common kernel is that journey of self-knowledge, and that is a lifelong journey. And I can also equally list you the number of people I know who are in very ostensibly successful positions, who are deeply insecure, in the 40s and 50s, who are burning out inside, who would not necessarily know it. So it's a question of making sure that, you are comfortable with yourself and understanding that we are all works in progress. And it's a wonderful thing and not something to feel insecure about.
So I would say that I've seen confidence come from how much time you've spent. Well, it's really your confidence in something if you're now within your comfort zone for something. And the more times you've pushed yourself out of that comfort zone, the quicker your comfort zone expands, and then the more things you feel confident about. And so yes, there's definitely a correlation with age, but I think there's more a correlation with attitude to that comfort zone. And some of the most successful people that I know, in my personal career have been, have started with one guy had a speech impediment and would go to weekly public speaking classes to push his comfort zone weekly. If I think he was going twice a week, and now you would never know. And he's got he's caught up in confidence but he's had to work on that himself, by focusing on himself and his own development. So I think it's really a willingness to do that, which will get, if confidence is important, and the willingness to push yourself a bit is going to just build it faster.
I would just really quickly add, find the people to surround yourself with that give you confidence as well, doesn't matter how old you are. So find those supporters, the people that give you energy, the people that give you that sense of self-belief. That could be friends, family, people that you work with. So if you're not finding them in the organization you're in, that might be a sign that you're in the wrong place, because actually that's the kind of environment that you deserve, you should be part of. So it comes from within, but you also want people to be able to reinforce it.
Brilliant. We have a question from Amelia to Emma. What motivated you to stay in the same company for 12 years?
So I think in large organizations, whilst it's the same company, you have such a huge amount of change that takes place particularly over a 12-year period, but also within just different parts of the business. So whilst I've had the same employment contract for 12 years, I've done probably 6 different jobs in that time that have required me to either move physically to another country or have asked me to sort of move into a different part of HSBC, and therefore have had to kind of learn things. So for me, it's been that sort of constant level of change and challenge that I've had in the fact that there's just been so many different things that the organization has needed to do. And as I mentioned, the start of my time there was at the beginning of the financial crisis. And for the whole of the financial services industry, that meant a huge amount of change, cultural change, and particularly the sort of the people aspects of the working environment within banks was something I was very closely involved in. So time has flown, I guess, as well, in terms of the amount of work that's actually involved. I would also say that, I think it's something that these days we just really need to think about. When you join an organization, think about actually what is it that you want to get out of that role or that particular, area that you've decided to join, and just be really clear with yourself that this is something that by X amount you would want to have gained this. And if you don't feel that you're getting it, feel like you should be changing and helping to influence the things that you're spending time on. So don't just let time pass, because it goes very quickly.
Thank you, Emma. So we have one last question from Ray. And he asks, what are the most versatile and valuable skills that you can gain while at Oxford? And what extracurricular responsibilities demonstrate them?
So I'm happy to start. So I was the bar manager at St Hilda's, so definitely acquired some skills whilst I was there. I probably won't go into all of those skills that I acquired, but seriously, actually that part of my time at Oxford was really interesting, because actually running the bar gave me a real exposure to a completely different aspect of student life, and also gave me exposure and experience to thinking about how do you run a business, how do you make a place attractive for people to come and spend time in, how do you plan and manage your supply, how do you think about budgeting, and how do you go and negotiate for more funds, which is always an interesting experience. But I think outside of that, the thing that I guess I learned most from Oxford was actually really feeling the ability to focus on a lot of information and to be able to condense and distill that into key points, key arguments, or key conclusions quickly or under pressure, I suppose, which actually I have to say I use probably day in, day out, and I always have done since I graduated. It's an intense experience being in Oxford, and the amount of learning and information that you are faced in the 3 or 4 years that you're there is immense. But that continues to be the case in the real world in terms of, you know, how do you really make sense of all the data inputs that you get. So for me, that was a fantastic skill that I'd say I really value.
I think that's definitely true of my experience as well. Like that under pressure ability to condense information and come up with an answer quickly, or you know, just generally work under pressure, I feel was something you know, started with Oxford and then built on in the city as well. I think other skills to pick up really depend on the type of person you are. For me, it was a lot of teamwork and, you know, general experience running teams or managing people. I set up the rugby club at St Hilda's, and you know, so that was the first experience of getting something off the ground and trying to involve lots of people and get it going and working as a team. You know, I was also in the Officer Training Corps, which was a sort of part-time army, at which you can do at Oxford, and that was fantastic for you know, really learning team management skills. So it kind of those were a few things that really helped me, but I think it depends on what you want to get out of it.
A couple of things both within Oxford as well as, you know, when I was in my second year, we didn't have examinations. Then I actually worked at a Jericho cafe as a waitress in the weekends, and that was a wonderful balance to the intensity of student life. I will add to what both of you have mentioned. I think also to say the performance and confidence and nerves and working, you know, holding your ground in front of a senior person, whether it's your tutor or whether it's whatever, or my fellow Hilda bees and myself, we set up the Oxford University Chinese Cultural Society. And I look back at our term sheets and I don't know how we managed to come up with a different event every week, you know, while managing all of that. And just being able to just push yourself really hard, but at the same time to self-care so that you don't burn out. That's something you can only learn from experience, and you will learn it from experience with trial and error. There will be times when you're actually flat out and you just realize, okay, you're past a point somewhere along the way, and you know next time you go along that you kind of got to retreat before you reach that point. But at the same time, it also allows you the wonderful experience of realizing you can achieve so much more, whether it's by yourself or whether it's with other people working on those conditions as well. It was a very outward looking society. We didn't have an Asian based society that was interested in welcoming people from a non-Asian background into the cultures. So I think you know, being able to come think of creative ways in which we could introduce that was early days for what later ended up being the start of my corporate career, which was marketing. So I think that was one very big thing. I think also just being able to stay steady and just to stay steady and find your own voice, especially in a place like Oxford or Cambridge or many other, you know, similar kinds of work at places, whether you're dealing with a very tough investor, you know, whether you're dealing with someone else, you know, just being able to hone those skills of being quietly confident in what you want to present, but still stay humble enough so that you're not so arrogant and you think that you know everything, and that you're able to learn completely. Again, that mix is something that is best acquired through experience, and you will acquire it through veering on the wrong side sometimes, where you may walk into something being completely confident and then realize that you were beset with nerves, and that turned out different, but actually it turned out better than you thought. I think just really setting yourself up and putting yourself forward for these experiences as much as possible, you know, just so that you make sure you don't just wait for stuff to come to you. That's quality is all around you all the time, and make sure that you use your time at Oxford to give yourself the benefit of the experience.
I would also just add as well that I learned almost acrobatic cycling skills when I was at Oxford, which, to be honest with you, have been put to good use since then. So able to cycle holding many different things with a chain around my neck, and yeah.
Yes. I think one key thing also is learning what it feels like to be hard on yourself. I think one of the problems that we face in LPI is high achievers, especially women, I would say, men as well. They manifest differently, but we get quite a lot of imposter syndrome coming through from high performing women. And I trace that back actually to just being surrounded by very bright people, who are working themselves very hard. And it may seem like a strange thing to say, but when you start to learn yourself what kind of gremlins sit on your shoulder, and just to make sure that you can pick up from yourself when that happens, this is a critical life skill that will really help you to be kinder on yourself and to be able to celebrate, your achievements. And that's particularly important because when you're too hard on yourself, it's like driving a car with half the handbrake on. You can still get very far, but you're just holding yourself back so hard and you don't even realize it. And that I think is particularly important because if we're talking about resilience, especially during navigating our career during difficult times, if you don't learn the trick of how to be kinder on yourself and how to pick yourself up again and up again and up again, you're gonna stay stuck, and it's a pretty painful place to be. So I think that's learning how that manifests within yourself and finding how to reach out for support and get yourself sort of back out of there again is, I think, something which the crucible experience of Oxford is particularly good at practice, for you to practice that skill.
Amazing. Emma, Sam, Elaine, thank you so much. We're very grateful to have you joining us today. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for watching. Please continue to join us in our community week. Today has been extremely useful and insightful. And have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.